Welcome to Talk of the Bay. I am your host, Suki Wessling, and Talk of the Bay is your local talk program brought to you every weekday at 5 p.m. Today, I am joined by scholars from UC Santa Cruz, and we are going to be talking about the Humanizing Technology Certificate Program for undergraduate students studying engineering. Supported by a grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities, this program aims to help students in STEM fields consider the impact that their work might have on society. From chatbots writing term papers to robots taking factory jobs, human society is being changed by technology created by people who don't necessarily consider the real-world impacts of their work. I know this is a huge area of concern across many disciplines, and instead of focusing just on the looming problem today, I hope our guests can shed some light on solutions. So joining me today, I have in the studio Laura Martin, who has a PhD in literature from UC Santa Cruz and is currently a continuing lecturer at Porter College and a program manager at the Humanities Institute. She is co-PI on the Humanizing Technology Project. Welcome, Laura.
Hello, thank you. Thanks for having me.
And also in the studio, Pranav Anand is a professor of linguistics. His work focuses primarily on how languages encode perspectival information. Did I say that correctly?
Sounds great.
I did look it up, but I forgot. You would think I would know that. I have a degree in linguistics, but you know what? I don't remember that word. And finally, online we have Jody Greene, Special Advisor to the Provost for Educational Equity and Academic Success. Jody was a literature professor at UC Santa Cruz starting in 1998. In 2016, they took on a new role as founding director of the campus's teaching center, CITL. Welcome, Jody. So first of all, I mean, the obvious question is, what is humanizing technology? What is the idea behind this? Well, just so I can create a visual here. The two of them in the studio just pointed at each other simultaneously. If I had a video going, it would have been awesome. Go ahead, Pranav.
Yeah, that's humanizing technology. It's pointing fingers.
Exactly. There you go.
But I mean, I think, when we came up with the term, it was meant, as most, humanists often do, to convey multiple, perhaps contradictory ideas simultaneously. And one of them is the idea of centering the human in the process, like you were saying in the introduction. So, and that can be in many ways. I mean, one of the things is, at least for right now, technologies are all created by humans. And so one question is how and why, for who, what is the history of those processes? But then the other one is the impacts, who gets impacted. And also, how do people react? How do they try to control? How do they try to misuse or use technology? And so what we want to do, instead of talking about, the nuts and bolts of a particular technology in the moment, we want to instead have the students themselves ask the questions why and how. And that's one notion of humanizing technology that we were thinking of.
Mm-hmm. And given how quickly technology moves, focusing on the hot new technology that we're all worried about probably is not the right way to go with undergraduates who have several years before they'll be out in industry.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, things move so rapidly, even, not even just about the actual technology, but the landscape of the existing technological properties. So I am co-designing one of the courses that's currently being taught on language technologies with my colleague, Kirsten Silver-Gruss, who's in literature, and Allison Wen, who's in psychology. And, we were thinking a lot about social media technology and what we were going to do. And then in December, we had to scrap it all because Twitter exploded, right? So there are like real world events happening that are super important that are, so contemporaneous. It's hard to actually teach a class and have that content even be current before the class is taught.
Yeah, but on the other hand, how cool to have something happen in real time that you can use as an example.
Yeah, and I think that points to the other thing about humanizing technologies that we were trying to do, which is that human questions and human issues, they often have no simple answer. Maybe they don't even have a right answer. And so in a lot of the discussions that we are having in these classes, it's trying to get these students who, for good or for ill, they're a lot of their collegiate experience in their majors is focused on things where there is often one right answer. And we try to get them to realize, well, oftentimes the journey is really important because you don't know where you're going to end up. And so we don't have a right answer to Twitter, right? No one really knows what to do.
Yeah, and I'm going to see if we've actually got Jody here on the line. Hello, Jody.
Hello, can you hear me now?
I can hear you now. Welcome. So I believe I already introduced Jody, but Jody, why don't I bring you into the conversation? I know that one of the things that you were eager to talk about was the inception of the project and where it came from. Why this project? Why now?
Yeah, so there's a couple kind of, you could say, problems that we were trying to solve with this project or opportunities that we were trying to grab. One is, we hear locally and statewide and really across the whole world that it's not clear that folks who are creating the technologies that we're all using are necessarily thinking about the possible downstream impacts of those technologies, or even questions of access and who gets access to those technologies. So we were, wanting to make sure that we were in the tradition of a great liberal arts university, turning out students who had a kind of three-dimensional and also a historical understanding of the technologies that they were creating. And then on the other side, we have a really overwhelming number of students who want to come here and study engineering right now, and we've seen a lot of melt in the humanities. The literature major was the third largest major at UC Santa Cruz when I came here. So we also wanted to make sure that, the expertise and the history and present of technology that is here at UC Santa Cruz was available to engineering students who often have a very, very high credit count. So they need to take general education courses. And our thought was, why not give them general education courses that would be genuinely useful to them and that would allow us to capitalize on the strengths of our humanities faculty and humanities adjacent faculty, because we're also collaborating with colleagues in the arts in this project.
Yeah, it's an interesting way to work on the problem of, that I know I've been following in education now for a long time, because when I was a college student in the ancient days, there was this sense of people should never go to university for training for a job. It should be to mold their mind and develop their ideas. But the fact of the matter is that a lot of people are looking at UC as a great way to get a job in tech, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And as they should be. But, we can, and I think this is maybe what Pranav was talking about before I came on, we can see some of the effects of people churning out technologies primarily with the profit margin in mind without really thinking through holistically what are the potential effects that those technologies are going to have. And so, we thought this would be an opportunity to allow these students and other students on the campus to really think through the implications of the technologies that are being created and disseminated all over the place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I wondered if each one of you could perhaps name a technology, something we're familiar with that is incorporated into our lives already that had maybe an unintended effect or an effect that you think is a strong one in our society, so people can get a sense of how much of an effect something that we consider now to be, everyday technology that we always use, how it changed our lives in ways that we didn't really consider. Laura?
Sure. One thing that I teach a lot about is digital reading versus reading in print.
Yes.
And which is very interesting, and there's a lot of research on that right now. But one thing that, when we're reading digitally on these various devices that we have, what we're often doing because of the form itself, we're skimming, right? We're hyperlinking out to various sources. We're not reading in a sort of deep critical mode that one would read if one was reading in print that didn't allow you to go outside of it so much. So I teach about this often, and this is touched on in a couple of different courses that we offer too, but it's something that you might not notice because we're just used to using these devices in this way, and they're very useful in this way. So it's not all bad. This is another thing this program is really trying to get across. Like there are benefits and there are costs and benefits to every sort of technology, but that's just one that we deal with every day and that we may not really be conscious of, what we are getting and not getting from this particular digital mode.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's interesting that right now that particular technology is particularly interesting because your students might not remember a time when
Yes.
they didn't use it, but all of you faculty do remember a time when you didn't have digital books.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
a clear divide there. Pranav, something that you can think of.
Yeah, so I think one of the ones that we talk about in this language technology class is cryptography. So, the history of cryptography goes back to the 9th century, and it was for a long time a tool of the state. It was something that governments did, and there's just a really fascinating history of governments sort of using the mail system as a way to just learn about whatever traffic is passing through their capitals and then selling it to the highest bidder, which sounds very similar to what we have now. But then something happened in the 20th century where it moved to being something that was under the sort of the ambit of a government to a commercial institutions. And I could say more about why that happened. But now we have a lot of commercial cryptographic products. And I think there was a great celebration with the idea of democratization of those technologies, and they were very useful, for instance, in the Arab Spring. But there's a flip side, and the flip side is that, when you protect any person's communications, then you protect any person's communications. So now we have the flip side of that is that there are other kinds of organizations who are able to run massive online networks. And it was something that we should have seen happening. We should have seen that coming. And it struck people, with a lot of surprise, 20 years ago. But it's something that you could see if you take that long view of how cryptography developed.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. And Jody, go ahead.
Well, I guess I'm going to pick the obvious one, which is ChatGPT. When we developed this certificate program, ChatGPT was not really on most of our radars. It maybe was on Pranav's because he thinks about natural and artificial language. But it's such a great time to be having these conversations. And if you one of the things that we were really committed to in this certificate program was helping students who, as others have already said, are often taken very quickly to yes or no answers or right or wrong. ChatGPT is an opportunity to linger in the space of something that has a lot of possibility, but also has a lot of peril. And so I see that, it can be an incredible teaching tool, right? It can be an amazing editing tool. It might even help us grade papers more effectively. And at the same time, we're all worried about its implications for academic integrity and creativity. So I think of ChatGPT as kind of, on some level, a kind of test case for why a certificate like this needs to exist so that we're not constantly, I'm a historian of the book. I don't want us to be blindsided by technologies of communication and knowledge technologies over and over and over again.
Yeah, and I, ChatGPT. You've probably all seen the meme that's running around with the quote from Plato, saying how this horrible new technology is going to ruin civilization, the written word. So you're nodding, Pranav. So go ahead. Talk about a little bit about that attitude that every new technology is going to ruin the world.
Yeah, that's one of the things that we try to get across to the students is that, many of the a lot of the hand-wringing that we do, you can look back 100 years or 500 years and see the same thing. So, for instance, there's like this famous anecdote about how in Roman times, there are people who are constantly bemoaning the fact that someone can't wait to go to the docks to find the latest information. They're constantly checking the docks, and it's the same thing as constantly checking your phone, right? Which is one of the truisms is that technology can change and perhaps even advance, but people are often very similar to each other, even millennia apart. So, I mean that impulse to always be on the informational cutting edge, you see that over and over again in human history. And I think that humanization of the past helps people recognize how sometimes, well, maybe this is just how things are. And that's useful because if you can filter that away, then you can try to think about, okay, what's new and what's potentially perilous in this moment.
Mm-hmm. We're going to take a short break. We will be back in just a minute with more Talk of the Bay. And I want to remind you that many of our programs, including the wonderful State of Mind, are podcasted, and you can subscribe on all major podcasting platforms. So please subscribe to State of Mind so you don't miss a single one, and subscribe to Talk of the Bay because we have different hosts every night, and we have so many different topics. And here we are back at Talk of the Bay. I'm your host, Suki Wessling, and we're having such a fascinating, I could talk to these people all night long, and I hope you're all enjoying it. Our conversation today is with 3 UCSC professors who are involved in a certificate program called Humanizing Technology at UCSC, which is for undergrads, especially in engineering. And we've been talking about I guess we've been talking about the past of technology and some problems that technology has caused or not caused. So my next question is, what does it mean to use humanistic methods to study something, to study anything? What does that mean what would that mean to an engineer?
I'll go ahead. That's fine. Perhaps I will use an example to illustrate kind of what we mean. So I was talking with one of our GSIs who's teaching a course right now called Humans and Machines. His name is Dustin Gray, and he's a philosophy PhD student. And I was kind of asking him about how the class is going and what he was up to at the moment. And was teaching about computational machines and really the question about whether or not computers can think. And he sort of started historically with this famous Alan Turing essay from 1950 that's asking this question. And I guess Turing in this essay says, like, no, computers can't think, but he was predicting that in the future, actually I think he says 2020, they would be able to. So he was telling me that, he and the students were talking about this question of, can computers think? And really that led them to, well, can they think like us? And then, well, how do we think, and what is thinking? And really what they were doing was getting at, the nature of thinking itself. And so I guess I like this example and for many reasons, but it kind of illustrates what we mean by humanistic thinking to some degree, especially as it applies to technology and engineering, and that we're not really applying sort of humanistic thinking to these disciplines, but kind of showing how these questions, very human questions of what does it mean to think, are really inherent in this discipline, if this makes sense, and really inherent to all disciplines. So in some ways, we're trying to draw this out for students and help them to think more closely about what is really human and the human problems and issues inherent in what they're doing. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And would you say that there's anything that students study where there isn't something humanistic underlying it? Is there a pure math? Is there a pure physics?
I mean, I don't know. Maybe there is, right? I mean, there's reality that's independent of humans that would exist without us.
Yeah.
But maybe not technology. I mean, it might be that technology is inherently human because, at least for now, humans are the ones creating it, right? And we're the ones making those artifacts. Uh-huh. So it's hard. I mean, I think it's really easy. I was a math major, and abstraction is a really important and powerful tool for trying to understand the world. And abstraction is pulling away some of the dimensions. And I think there's a way to study technology by pulling away the human dimensions, but they're still there. And Laura's point is they're there even if you don't talk about them. And in fact, especially if you don't talk about them, they're definitely still there. They're just sort of ghostly in the background, and that's when it becomes potentially dangerous.
Yeah, I'm thinking about the promo I just did for State of Mind coming up next, which is about alcoholic families and how you can't really solve the problem if you don't confront it. And in a sense, that's just the answer to being human, that we create problems when we don't confront things, when we don't really look at them and consider the effects of them.
And I think that point that you just made, Suki, is maybe one of the things I would say about humanistic thinking personally, which is that deep, close look at something. Close reading exists as a term for a reason, and that's because that idea of meditating on an object and trying to understand it, its full complexity, sort of the opposite of abstraction, is very much the impulse in the humanities. And so I can give you another example that's similar to Laura's, which is that in the language technologies class, one of the things that we try to make the students understand is that books are a technology. And it's a lot of technology we don't think of as technology because it's so ubiquitous. It's not new. But you want to sit there and stare at it and understand, how did it get to be in this form? And so we take them on a trip to the special collections, and they look at all of the different kinds of books that people have done. And then they do a project where they take a couple objects and try to reflect on those. And that specificity, that particularity, and thinking about material culture in these concrete ways, and then telling a story, that's something that many of them have never done outside of high school. Let's hope. And I think they found it incredibly interesting and challenging, and helped them to ground how, looking at an object can help you understand the bigger picture in addition to the object itself.
Yeah, I don't know if the special collections are ever open, if they have. I think they occasionally have things that are open to the public. I, one time, through a fluke, got to get a little private tour, and man, some of the things that they have are just fascinating.
Amazing.
Books.
It's amazing.
They're books, but they're not what you would think of as a book. So, Jody, I don't want to neglect you. Would you like to add anything to what we've been saying?
I don't think so. I mean, I think this idea of the humanities as intangible is really, in that anecdote, you see that it's not necessarily intangible, right? We also deal with objects. But I think, to go back to what Laura said, one of the things that it means to look at things using humanistic methods is to open questions. And when we spoke with, and to keep them open, right, on some level for as long as possible. And when we spoke with some of the faculty in the engineering division, one of the things we asked them, what would you like us to, what kind of work would you like us to do with your students? One of the things that they said to us was, we would love it if you could help our students, give our students an opportunity to hold questions open. And so I love to think that that's actually what's happening in the certificate program, that we're teaching them to go deeper with questions about, what is thinking, right? And what is a thinking machine? And are we thinking machines? And on some level, to not bind ourselves quite so strongly to what we already know, but to really push the limits of how we can think a question.
Okay, well, thank you. I'm just received word that we have an urgent message, and so Tony, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Are we okay on the air now?
We are on the air.
All right. Well, Santa Cruz County Sheriff has just put out an update, and it's an evacuation warning, not an evacuation order, but an evacuation warning to stand by and be ready to leave, and it's for the following areas. It's for Felton Grove and Paradise Park along the San Lorenzo River, Soquel Village, Soquel Creek, an area along Corralitos Creek, and an area along Holohan Road. So those are the areas that have flooded in the past, and the sheriff's office just put out an evacuation warning to be prepared and get ready to leave because the storm is coming in, and we're due for, of course, quite a bit of rain. All that rain's going to be running off into the creeks. Okay?
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you for calling in. That was Tony Russamano, one of our hosts, who had that important message. So please do, if you're up in the mountains or anywhere in a floodplain, please do keep watch on what's going on with the evacuations, the warnings, and hopefully we won't have any emergency evacuations. Back to our show. This is KSQD 90.7, ksqd.org. And we are here with UCSC professors talking about the Humanizing Technology program at the university. And because we got that interruption, my whole train of thought is, of course, now interrupted. So let me get back. So I guess the obvious place to go next is to ask, give some examples of unintended consequences that really caused bad things to happen, so that we can get a sense of if the people who designed that technology had been able to do what you're hoping to teach these students to do, could they perhaps have mitigated some of the effects of a technology? So Jody, do you have an example that you could give?
Yeah, I mean, obviously we're having a big conversation nationally and internationally right now about social media. And I wouldn't necessarily say that had we known that people would become addicted to social media to the degree that they are, that would have stopped the development of social media, because I think the point was to get people addicted as quickly as possible. But I do think that we could have imagined, or I would like to imagine, a world in which the only marker of success is not how many people take this thing up and spend X hours a day on it, right? So I think it's the ability to ask about social goods and social benefits. There are clearly benefits to social media, and also, we know that there are harms. I also think, though, maybe even more importantly, now that we find ourselves in the middle of this debate, there are some people who would like to, for instance, lay the entire young people's mental health crisis at the feet of social media. And there are other people who are pushing really hard back on that and saying, now, wait a minute, we've just come out of a pandemic. We're in the middle of an economic crisis, right? So I think it's the ability to navigate these challenges as they emerge and to be balanced participants in a debate like that, rather than immediately running to one side or the other, that is the most benefit. I think that's what we really see ourselves as doing. Yes, there's some predictive dimensions to this, right? Can you see how a technology might run into trouble? But there's also the capacity to really be balanced when challenges with a technology do emerge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I actually had an experience directly related to that at an online conference I was at, that they asked for Q&A questions, and then they said they were going to read the questions that got most upvoted. Mm-hmm. And I thought, but they're the experts that we're here to learn from. Why don't they choose the questions that they think are most important? Because my vote might be for, the sort of crappy softball question that everybody always asks, and they could have just dismissed that in a second. But that's direct result of social media and gaming, this upvoting. So, Yeah,
and I think, one of the things that we see in the classroom a lot is a kind of a decline, a privileging of the like or don't like. Mm-hmm. So, as a literary studies professor who taught 18th century, 17th and 18th century literature, one of the things that I often said to my students was, this may not be a literature that you love, but it might be a literature that you could learn from, in the sense that it is the period, at which a lot of the questions that we continue to ask about gender, about race, about social class, about equality, about equity, that those questions really gained their first major momentum in human history. But, I did find as time went on that I had to work harder to make the case that liking was not the most important sort of critical lens to bring,
Or a critical
so
lens
I think
at
that's
all.
an example, right, of something where we really see the effects of a social media that are in the coming out in our classroom.
Yeah, and Laura interjected something. Go ahead, Laura.
I just said liking is perhaps not a critical lens at all. That's all. Yeah. But just to reiterate Jody's point, this is something we talk about a lot that we were trying to accomplish in the program is, try to treble, for lack of a better word, this oppositional thinking like she's talking about, like technology, bad, or, social media, bad, or good, So this is really important when we're even trying to sort of ferret out all these various issues, that we're talking about here about technology itself. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. Pranav, do you have another example of something that not necessarily that people would have known all the bad effects of, but that maybe they could have benefited from thinking a little bit more before they put it out?
Yeah. I think I'm a bit more of a partisan than it sounds like Jody and Laura are. I think about this a lot in the context of content moderation. So the tools that we use for flagging and unflagging material on social media sites like Facebook and YouTube. And I think the history of that is extremely depressing. The current journalism on this shows that the way things like YouTube works and the way that ChatGPT works is that you have a whole bunch of people, often in the global South, in basically colonies of Western states, who are paid very little money to see horrific images. And that's just the current snapshot. But when you go back and look 10, 20 years ago, you see that it was just people making things up off the top of their heads in offices because they didn't recognize that if you gave people sort of unfettered communication access, that people would do potentially horrible things. And that's because of a strain of techno-utopianism that, before I came to California, I didn't understand, but it's sort of pervasive in Silicon Valley, the idea that information wants to be free and that all communication is information. And I don't know, I just think we've seen, 2 decades of the harm that kind of thinking has caused. And that's one of my aims for this certificate, is to sort of show over and over again that we've confronted the same specter repeatedly. You probably want to shut me up because I'll keep going on this.
No, not at all. And because I think that's, it's so important what you brought up, the utopian thinking, because although humans, we invented the horror movie. It seems like we're really pessimists, but really humans behave over and over in the most optimistic ways, which is really interesting to think about. I was around. I went to Stanford with a bunch of the people who created that stuff in the 80s, and I'm married to one of them in the original Java group at Sun, and they created these things that are wonderful tools. And then but we have this problem that we as humans don't necessarily think about all the bad things. So do we teach students to be more pessimistic? And I'm asking that rhetorically for you to think about, because we're going to take a little short break here and come right back with more Talk of the Bay.
Spend your Monday night at the Opera on KSQD Santa Cruz. You'll hear the world's greatest singers tell some of the world's most powerful, romantic, funny, and unforgettable stories, all set to the most glorious music ever composed. It's all about drama and being a diva. Monday night at the Opera, 7 to 10 p.m. on KSQD Santa Cruz 90.7 FM.
This is Nikki Silva of the Kitchen Sisters. Join us every Tuesday at 3 p.m. for a mix of stories, interviews, sound portraits, and unexpected audio works from hidden kitchens, the hidden world of girls, lost and found sound, and local history and voices. Every other week, the Kitchen Sisters presents PRX Remix, a veritable mixtape of works by independent audio producers around the world. Tune in for the Kitchen Sisters. Davia Nelson and I are extremely happy and proud to be part of our new community radio station, KSQD Santa Cruz.
You are listening to Talk of the Bay, and I am Suki Wessling, and I have been having the most excellent conversation with my guests. I could talk about this stuff all night. Humanizing Technology is a program that is for undergraduate students at UCSC who are in STEM fields and are able to broaden their understanding of their fields through learning about the humanities. And it's pretty exciting to me because I have with me Jody Greene, Pranav Anand, and Laura Martin, and there is a white box over your names. And listen to me, I actually got your names out. I'm so proud of myself. Computers. So here we are talking about technology, and technology is really trying to kick our butts today, and it's not working. We are not going to let it happen. So we're talking about this program, and my next question was about how you approach. So you did talk about one thing which I thought was fascinating, which is to go and show students, tell them, you know what a book is, and then show them all these things that are also books, but they're completely different. So what are some other, how do you teach humanistic methods of thinking about technology especially to students who, a lot of our students coming into university who are in STEM fields have been hyper focused on their STEM classes because they're piling on more and more. My son wanted to study computer science at Berkeley, and he knew he had to get calculus done before he applied, and that's a lot, right? So Jody, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, I'm going to take your question in a slightly different direction just to say, because I wanted to make sure that we talked about this, that actually developing these courses was in and of itself a really innovative process, and one that our faculty, as far as I know, and the graduate students who were involved had never done before. So we had a summer institute that was directed by the Center for Innovations in Teaching and Learning, and we brought together a cohort of 15 people, so 10 faculty members and 5 graduate students, if memory serves me. And we spent a couple of weeks together in teams of 3 designing the courses. And we used a protocol to do this that we actually developed at CITL for STEM courses, to redesign STEM courses. But we kind of broke it down and put it back together again and got these teams to collaborate in developing these courses. And this is interesting, right, because teaching has historically been very privatized. You go away, you decide what books you're going to teach, you decide what kind of, essays you want students to write in the humanities or what kind of projects you want them to do. And you don't really work with others in designing courses. And so I think we kind of had a blast deciding, really in a very open field, what would we like students to come away from these courses able to do? What kind of questions would we like them to be able to think? So in the history of technology one, it was really about what other technological moments can we point to that were, as we would say now, disruptive. And how might knowing that, these are not the first disruptive technologies in history, how might that really change? Imagine when the wheel came along, right? And there have never been wheels before. And all of a sudden, people can get around faster and they can get their food to market and they can, have chariot races, right? And I think we forget that there have been really transformational technologies throughout history. Or, for our course on race and racialization and technology, really trying to think about, certainly the questions of access and who has access to technology, but also how have technologies been used. Think of something like the Underground Railroad, right? How have we used technologies in liberatory ways? So I think we really gave ourselves a lot of space to develop these courses collectively, and also a lot of creativity in imagining what these courses might do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that sounds, I mean, it's so interesting to me because you're talking about designing education with metaphors from construction, basically. So physical metaphors, which it really fits this situation. Laura, I wanted to ask you, since I think it sounds like from your bio that you are fully in the humanities world, how, when you think about connecting with these students, many of whom are fully in the technology world, and are, you know, I teach also, and I have those students like, a novel? Why do I have to read a novel? I want to go do some programming.
It's a technology, you know?
So tell me, how do you connect with them? How do you get into their thought space, and how do you bridge that gap?
Sure. I mean, you know, it's a truism of pedagogy, but we meet them where they are, you know? I mean, I do teach a host of things, but I mean, one thing I do teach about is like censorship and art. You know, I teach for Porter, which is the arts college. And so we have a unit on this, and inevitably censorship leads to just stuff today, you know, internet, various technologies and things. And, you know, meeting students where they are and things that they're interested in and they know a lot about. And then you can take them back in history and show them, you know, that this is, like Pranav was saying earlier, these questions are ones that just repeat and repeat and repeat. We haven't solved them fully. We've learned a lot if we can look back in the past and understand this historical trajectory. So kind of meeting them where they are to something that they know, also showing them that what they think they know about this current problem that they experience is maybe just the surface of what, you know, there is to know about this, and taking them back in history helps, you know. That's one way I think about it. To speak to Jody's point too, just, you know, they were talking about this collaborative nature of our pedagogical design. You know, these students that we're trying to speak to, these engineering students, they often work in group projects. You know, Pranav, I'm sure, can speak more to this, but so we wanted to think in this collaborative mode because that's what they're used to working in. So we had that very much on our minds. Again, another way to sort of meet them where they are, and you know, they're used to doing this, and they're very strong in this area. So this is another reason we were trying to design the courses in this way, by us kind of going through this process, but also so it would be set up for them in this way. I don't know if you want to speak to something specifically.
Yeah, I mean, actually, when Jody was talking, I was thinking about that aspect, that you know, one of the things that we did in the institute that Siddle organized that was actually extremely destabilizing as an instructor was, I mean, Jody was being very nice. It was because normally you do think, okay, what do I want them to read? And then you sort of scaffold the class, including the assessments afterwards. And Jody and Kendra said, who ran the institute together, they said, okay, what do you want them to learn? And we're like, we want them to read these things. They're, no. What do you want them to learn? And so we had to come up with pithy slogans. And then even worse, we were critiqued by the other teams about this. So there was a round robin aspect. And then from there, we built the assessments, and then we did the readings. And so the assessments ended up being very, very unique. I've never had something like this. So it was all about, well, here's a problem. Why don't you figure out how you might go about solving that problem? Which is, you know, that's the language that I think an engineer can appreciate, right? But then it was, well, here's all the dimensions to the problem. So let's unfurl the problem and look at how your potential solution could cause a harm over here. And then only after we had those assessments did we start thinking, okay, now we need to bring in some readings to undergird those. And so I think that was really, I came back from that experience and I kept telling my colleagues, I was like, why don't we do that in all of our classes? And that I think helps to meet them where they are, because you think, okay, what are they going to do? And then you think after that, okay, now what do I need to support their learning? And I'm sure my colleagues from secondary school and primary school listening are like, yeah, that's what we do. We work together. We think about their assessments. But it's so unfamiliar for the university, and I think it's quite transformational as an instructor as well. In addition to helping these students, hopefully, it has helped me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, what you're describing is not the usual description one hears of academics at university. Working collaboratively in this way is really fascinating. And, you said something that sparked something in me. Would all of you, do you have any recommendations for people listening, something that they could read that if they're interested in following up on this, not something terribly academic, but a book or an article that you think that they would, that the lay reader would gain something from if they wanted to go deeper into this?
I mean, I think, honestly, just picking the two that I've already named, because, one's brain is tired at the end of the day, follow along in the popular press, the conversation about ChatGPT. And that might involve, listening to our own Ezra Klein, or reading the really fascinating piece that Ezra had in the New York Times this weekend about artificial intelligence. Mm-hmm. You could just follow the New York Times thread on artificial intelligence and on ChatGPT and see the rapidity with which we like to debate things and we like to bifurcate them. But there's been so much writing in the Atlantic. Does it really work? There was the piece in the New York Times about the one that went, I think it was in the New York Times, about the one that kind of went AWOL and started professing its love and trying to get the user, to come over to the dark side. And so I think, you can follow that one, and then it's I think, very important to follow the really heartbreaking national conversation that's happening about, young people, including our own students, and, the disaffection, the checking out, the mental health crisis. Does it really have to do with social media? It's really fascinating to follow that conversation and to really learn about, when is it helpful to think about a technological solution to a problem, and when does that not really actually begin to scratch the surface? And so those are the kinds of debate. I don't think you need to go away and read a book. I think you can just follow what's happening in the mainstream press and the popular press right now to really learn. Yeah,
I will second the recommendation for Ezra Klein's podcast. He's been this is one of the threads that he's been working on is the effects of AI on our culture, and it's been really interesting. And so subscribing to his podcast, he's also doing a series on the failure of lefty liberal governments in the U.S. to implement some of their priorities. So we here in California, that one's interesting to me too. So anyway, that was just an aside. So what sort of results? So how long has this been going on? I can't remember when it was started.
Well, it's very recent. So we applied for and received the award during last academic year. The institute that Jody and I were talking about was this summer, and then the courses have just started being taught this quarter. So this week is the last week of classes. So our first two classes are finishing up right now as we're talking. So you've got in on the ground floor.
All right. So you don't have a whole lot of feedback yet, but it'd be interesting, to follow this as it progresses. And I thank you all for coming. I am going to have to end the program 2 minutes early because I'll need to do another weather warning announcement. But I want to urge listeners to check out ksqd.org after probably tomorrow morning, because I'm tired of that time change. That's one technology I'm not fond of. So please do check the website tomorrow morning for a podcast of this, and on the page I will put all sorts of resources that we have talked about. So if you were in your car, you don't have to worry. It will all be there. And so I want to thank all three of you, Jody, Laura, Pranav, for coming from UCSC to talk about humanizing technology.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks so much for having us.
All right. And listeners, coming up next, we have State of Mind. But first, we're going to have a little weather announcement.